There is a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when a civilization doesn't fall. It simply stops believing in itself. No explosion, no single catastrophic event, just a slow, collective exhale, like a man who has been holding his breath for so long that he finally forgets why he was holding it in the first place. And the terrifying truth is this: that moment may already be happening, right now, all around you and inside you. We are taught to think of collapse as something that happens out there, in history books, in distant empires, in civilizations that weren't as smart or as advanced as ours. Rome fell, the Maya vanished, the Soviet Union crumbled. We study them like curious fossils, never once asking the question that should keep us awake at night. What did it feel like to live inside the collapse, without knowing you were already inside it? Because here's what history never tells you clearly enough. The people who lived through every great collapse didn't see it coming, not because they were blind, but because collapse doesn't announce itself. It disguises itself as normalcy. It wears the face of everyday frustration, of vague anxiety, of a nagging sense that something is profoundly wrong, but you can't quite name it. Sound familiar? The psychologist Robert Lifton spent decades studying what happens to the human mind under conditions of extreme social disruption. He found something remarkable. Before societies collapse structurally, they collapse symbolically. The shared stories we tell about who we are, why we matter, and where we're going, those stories start to fracture first. And when the stories break, something in the human psyche breaks with them. Not loudly, quietly. Like a mirror that develops a hairline crack, you only notice when the light hits it at the wrong angle. We are meaning-making creatures. This is perhaps the most fundamental truth of human psychology. We don't just live in the world. We interpret it, we narrate it, we construct elaborate symbolic architectures to make it feel coherent and safe. Anthropologists call this our myth system. Not myth as in fiction, but myth as in the deep organizing narrative that gives a culture its identity. Ancient Greeks had their Olympian gods. Medieval Europe had its great chain of being. Modern Western civilization built its myth on progress, individualism, and the belief that tomorrow would always be better than today. But what happens when that myth starts to feel hollow? What happens when the promises embedded in your civilization's story, that hard work leads to security, that institutions protect the innocent, that science will solve every problem, that your children will inherit a better world, start to ring false? What happens in the mind, in the soul of a person who can no longer trust the narrative they were handed at birth? The answer, according to some of the most profound thinkers of our time, is something called symbolic death. Not physical death, not even mental illness in the clinical sense, but a kind of inner dissolution, a loss of the psychological scaffolding that holds the self together. And on a collective scale, this is precisely what the early stages of social collapse look like from the inside. Not chaos, not riots, though those may come later. First comes a pervasive, creeping sense of meaninglessness, a society-wide depression that no medication can touch, because it isn't a chemical imbalance. It's a meaning imbalance. Think about the world you inhabit right now. Think about the conversations you have, the things you read, the mood that hangs in the air when strangers gather in public spaces. There is an unspoken heaviness, isn't there? A collective exhaustion that goes beyond physical tiredness. People are angry, but they're not sure at whom. People are afraid, but they can't fully name what frightens them. People are grieving, but no one has died. Or rather, what has died is invisible, and so the grief has nowhere to land. This is what psychologists call ambiguous loss, the mourning of something that hasn't been officially lost, something you can't hold a funeral for. We are mourning a world that felt solid, a future that felt possible, a social contract that felt real. And we are doing it in complete isolation from one another, because one of the most insidious features of social collapse is that it atomizes people precisely when they need connection most. Émile Durkheim, the father of modern sociology, wrote about this more than a century ago. He called it anomie, a condition in which the social norms and values that once regulated human behavior lose their force. People no longer know what is expected of them, what is permitted, what is sacred. The rules feel arbitrary, the institutions feel corrupt, the authorities feel illegitimate, and in that vacuum, in that space where shared meaning used to live, something dark grows. Not evil in the cartoonish sense, but the ordinary human evil of disconnection, of cruelty born from fear, of tribalism that mistakes the nearest stranger for the deepest enemy. But here's the question that haunts me, and that I suspect haunts you too. Is understanding all of this enough? If you can see the pattern, if you can name the psychological mechanisms at work, does that protect you? Does awareness function as a kind of armor? If that idea already resonates somewhere deep in your chest, stay with me, because what comes next may be the most important thing you hear today. The psychologist Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps. He watched human beings stripped of everything: family, identity, freedom, dignity, the basic certainties of survival, and he observed something that upended every assumption about human psychology. He found that even in the most extreme conditions of social collapse imaginable, some people did not disintegrate. Not because they were physically stronger, not because they were more educated or more privileged, but because they had maintained or discovered an internal source of meaning that no external force could fully destroy. Frankl called this the last human freedom, the freedom to choose your response to whatever happens to you. But I want to go deeper than that familiar quotation, because I think we've let it become a motivational poster when it deserves to be treated as a radical psychological claim. What Frankl was really saying is this: the self is not a product of its social conditions. It is not manufactured entirely by the culture, the economy, the political system, or the collective story around it. There is something at the core of personhood that can remain intact, even luminous, in the middle of collapse. This is not naive optimism. This is not the self-help gospel of positive thinking. This is a hard-won, blood-tested psychological truth. And it carries a profound implication. The work of navigating social collapse is not primarily political. It is not primarily economic. It is, at its deepest level, psychological and spiritual. The first territory that must be secured is the inner one. The philosopher Albert Camus understood this perhaps better than anyone. Writing in the aftermath of World War II, surrounded by the ruins of European civilization, he described the fundamental human challenge not as solving the problems of society, though that work matters, but as refusing to be destroyed by them. He called it revolt, not rebellion in the political sense, but a fierce daily insistence on remaining fully human in conditions that pressure you to become something less, to maintain curiosity when cynicism would be easier, to maintain compassion when cruelty would be safer, to maintain wonder when numbness would be more comfortable. This is the secret that very few people who talk about social collapse ever mention. Collapse is not only a threat, it is also, paradoxically, an invitation. Every civilization that has ever fragmented has also, in the same motion, created the conditions for something unprecedented to emerge. The fall of the Roman Empire, catastrophic by any measure, also created the space for the synthesis of Greco-Roman and Christian thought that would eventually birth the Renaissance. The collapse of the medieval worldview, which felt to people at the time like the end of all meaning, was the crucible in which modern science and individual consciousness were forged. Collapse destroys forms, but the energy contained within those forms doesn't disappear, it transforms. And the question that may be the defining question of your life, is whether you will be a passive victim of that transformation or an active participant in it. But there is a secret still deeper than this, a level that even the philosophers and psychologists rarely reach, and it is this: the collapse of the external world only has the power to destroy you if you have been using the external world as a substitute for something internal. The anxiety we feel when institutions fail is not only fear of practical consequences, it is the terror of a person who has outsourced their sense of meaning, identity, and security to structures that were never designed to carry that weight. When those structures wobble, the borrowed identity wobbles with them. The deepest psychological work of our time is not to fix the systems, though they need fixing, but to stop depending on the systems for the things only the inner life can provide, to stop looking to culture for your values, to stop looking to politics for your hope, to stop looking to economic security for your sense of worth, not because those things don't matter, but because they were never, and can never be, the foundation of a truly human life. The ancient Stoics called this the inner citadel, a fortress of character and consciousness that external events could besiege but never conquer. The Buddhist traditions speak of finding the still point at the center of the storm, not escaping the storm, but discovering within yourself a ground of awareness that the storm cannot reach. The mystics of every tradition, across every culture and every era of human history, have pointed to the same radical truth, that somewhere beneath the noise of the collapsing world, Beneath the fear and the grief and the confusion, there is something in you that has never been broken, something that does not depend on civilization for its existence, something ancient, luminous, and untouchable. And this is not escapism. This is not spiritual bypassing. Because the person who has found that ground, who has done the work of becoming genuinely themselves, rather than a reflection of their cultural moment, is not less engaged with the world. They are more engaged, more useful, more capable of contributing to what must be built in the ruins of what is falling. You cannot build anything lasting from a place of inner collapse, but from that deep, still, indestructible center of the self, from that place, anything is possible. The psychology of social collapse is, in the end, an invitation to the most important journey a human being can take, the journey inward, not to escape the world, but to return to it transformed, not as a survivor clinging to the wreckage, but as a builder who carries the blueprint for something new, not in any government document or economic theory, but in the quality of your attention, your compassion, your presence, your refusal to stop being fully, magnificently, irreducibly human. Civilizations fall, they always have, but the human spirit, that stubborn, inexplicable, terrifying, beautiful force, has never once, in all of recorded history, agreed to go with them. And neither will you. If this conversation reached something real in you, if it touched a question you've been carrying without quite knowing how to name it, then you already understand why this channel exists. Subscribe so we can keep going deeper together. Leave a comment and tell me, what does your inner citadel look like right now? And if you know someone who is quietly struggling with the weight of this world, share this video with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for another person is simply show them that they are not alone, and that the darkness they're feeling has a name and a meaning and a way through. The journey continues, and you are exactly where you need to be.